Well, hello, hello.
Hello there.
Hola, hola, everyone. Well, thank you to everyone that's zooming in, listening in, hopping in, whatever type of virtual tools you're using. But we're thrilled to be here as part of the Notch and Salesforce Present Pro and Content Connect 2020. And it is my esteemed pleasure to have my dear friend, my sister in arms, Rosanna DeRuthi, the Chief Diversity Officer of LinkedIn, joining us. Hello,
Hola,
Ro.
hola, hermanito. It's good to see you.
So good to see you. And of course, we have to start with where are you right now?
Right now, I'm in Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, northernmost tip of Miami-Dade County, with an amazing view of the ocean.
Excellent. So you just made a lot of people that are still in New York jealous. So you were able to get out for a little bit.
It's just a 1,200-mile drive. It's okay.
There you go. Life in the time of Corona.
Yeah.
So, Rosanna, I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you. You know, we're going to be talking about a couple of different things, but really centering on the role of brands and content when it comes to talking about diversity, equality, inclusion, belonging, and just really trying to educate ourselves about some of these issues because we're at such an important inflection point in our society and around the world. But I would love to hear a little bit about your background. Tell us what you do at LinkedIn and just give us a little flavor of, your personal background.
Sure. Currently, I'm Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at LinkedIn, which means I have the privilege of helping our team create access to the vision that we have as a company, which is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. I've spent much of my career in this work of diversity and inclusion. It found me. I didn't go looking for it. And it's been pretty evident whether I've been in financial services, media and entertainment, on the consulting side, in the healthcare environment, or as I am now working in social media, the importance of understanding, connecting, and being responsive to the needs of this amazing growth market. All too frequently, people think of diversity and they think of things to fix. I think of diversity, and I think that is the path to growth for any business, any organization. It's a way of connecting with communities that are not only consumers, they're your targeted employees, they're the individuals who are innovating and give what I would consider a much broader view of a world around us and how we connect with those consumers and how we create trusted relationships with those brands. So this work of diversity, inclusion, and belonging has been lifelong for me, but it wasn't something that I studied for or expected to do. I'm just kind of an activist for people's potential, and it's packaged in this role.
Look, you have been helping talent pretty much your whole professional career. And I will go on the record that I owe my whole professional career actually to you because you met me when I was still in college and helped me get my first summer internship on Wall Street when I was working in finance back then. But tell us a little bit about, kind of your cultural background because your story is really interesting. And then help us understand kind of the work that you were doing literally 20 plus years ago and how has that changed to where we are today?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'm a New York City born and raised girl. I'm the daughter of a Puerto Rican mom and a Cuban dad, so Spanish is my first language. And not only is the context of the culture you grow up in so much a part of who you are and the language you know and how you express yourself, but ultimately this ability to walk the world with a sense of confidence and swag. And certainly when I began my career, that wasn't necessarily the case. I'm a Black woman, a proud Afro-Latina, and in my 20s, recognized for myself that I was a lesbian, but certainly that wasn't something you talked about 20 some odd years ago in the work environment, particularly in financial services. And so much of my personal life has become an important context for understanding these gates that we walk through, whether they're gates of privilege, that one possesses, or the absence of those privileges and the things that you hide or cover in order to make it happen. And I think certainly in 2020, we're at a different time. It's Gay Pride Month. We celebrate this as companies. Our brands recognize the LGBTQ plus community, and we're proud to be affiliated with companies who recognize us. As an Afro-Latina woman, there's much discussed. Unfortunately, all too frequently, the context for diversity, as I said earlier, is about a problem that needs to be fixed, but not really seen in the macro of how much talent exists to contribute new perspectives, new awakenings, and new stories. And I think that in this work of content creation in particular, when we think about producing content, developing content, delivering content, we're talking about stories. We're talking about narratives. And all too frequently in my lifetime, my story has been missing. So for individuals like myself who do this work, for individuals like the people who are your customers, the ability to have this narrative go live is really critical. The ability to not only see oneself, but to relate. And that relatability is an important factor in how trust gets built. Trust comes in two dimensions. One, the ability to give trust because you see me, but also the consistency you demonstrate over time. And I think we're at that inflection point, certainly in the aftermath of all that we've seen, not only COVID-19, where we've seen the disparities and its impact from a health standpoint on underrepresented and underserved communities, but we've also seen the macro impact on the number of people who've been unemployed as a result of COVID-19, to the more current week that we've been experiencing around the Black Lives Matter movement and how we create environments that systemically erase the racism that's been built in. There's so much opportunity. I would have never imagined that my life would provide such great fodder for understanding these things. But what I recognize is it also provides a wonderful vehicle for understanding and recognizing that the biggest challenge that we face in society is that we don't know each other, that we don't have networks that reflect people whose experiences are different from our own. And it's not to say that there's something inherently wrong with that, but there certainly is something wrong if you're creating content for communities, if you're creating messages to reach people who come from those different communities, if you are in the business of hiring great talent, and that talent pretty much looks like the people you'd invite to your wedding, you have to check yourself. You're going to have to pause and think about that wedding invite list, because that's your network. And we love the people in our network, but it usually means that they're going to look a lot like us. They're going to have experiences a lot like our own. And the people we leave behind are the very people that we're now talking about, And so I think it's an unprecedented moment for each of us to know ourselves, because knowing yourself will give you access to what you can learn from others, about others. And that becomes a really critical part of the puzzle that we're building for the future. And for me, diversity, inclusion, and belonging is about building the pathway to the future.
I mean, there's so much there to unpack, because you're so just profound about this. You're so thoughtful about this. I mean, you and I have spoken a lot about this concept of intersectionality. The fun thing is you come across and people might think that you are Black. They might not know that you're Latina. When people see me and I tell them that I'm Dominican, they look at me funny and they're like, well, but you're not Black. You don't look like Big Papi. And so there's a natural misunderstanding of this concept of what does it mean to be diverse? What does it mean to be of color? And I think a lot of folks that are not of color, they're struggling with how to kind of approach this. So given you have this incredible platform at LinkedIn, how do you talk about that understanding of intersectionality? And tell us a little bit, because your title is so interesting. It's diversity, inclusion, but also this word belonging. Yeah. Tell us why that word is also important.
I mean, when we think about it, diversity is just who we are. Many of us have siblings that we're related to by DNA. We share a parent in common. And if you think about it, growing up, we're sharing bathrooms and bedrooms, and we live really closely, and we grow up one day and we're sitting across from each other at a dinner table during a holiday, and we're wondering how we could possibly be related to each other. This idea of the other isn't invented based on race or gender. This idea of the other is based on our own individuality, the person you see in the mirror every day, which is why I say we've got to begin with our own stories. But as you think about it, no one is any one thing. And I think the privilege that comes in many instances from being in a majority race or majority culture is you don't even realize that this is different. It's just the way things are. It becomes the default for thinking. It becomes the default for experiences and ideation. It becomes the default for how communities encounter. And so, Stephen, you and I come from, Latino families. We're the ones who invite people to come visit. There's no date by which they have to leave. There's no expiration date. It's not like 4 days and they've got to go. And it's like, no, families come with a one-way ticket and they hang out with you and they're a part of your life and a part of your world, and you celebrate that. And I think understanding that there are these different contexts of community and multiple layers to identity. Like, you can't ask me to pick my Blackness over my Latinaness or my Latinaness over being a lesbian. They're just who I am. And those intersections inform.
Wait, so we can't put you in a box, you mean?
You can't, the only thing boxes are good for are labels, and I hate them personally. But really important to relate to people and their lives and their experiences, which is why, as storytellers, the power of content marketing is you get to tell the story, you own the story. My 9-year-old son watches TV as much as we allow him to. He loves stories. He wants to grow up and be a director. And he even recognizes the power of telling that story. But when stories aren't told, we as human beings make the mistake of believing that those stories don't exist and that they're not important. And in fact, what we do is we erase people's identity. We erase those things they hold near and dear. And the impact of it is the lack of visibility. We look around us in the work environment. We don't see people in certain roles, not because they don't have the capabilities, but because they're not part of the story or the narrative we've built about what people are capable of. And
but Rosanna, we can't find the talent. It's so hard to find any people of color. I mean, how do you solve this problem? Because there's just no one out there.
Do you literally want to know how I've done that? Last year we took 100 people from LinkedIn to Afrotech so that they could meet 10,000 talented Black folks in technology, because the network gap is real. Like, if you're not in my network, I'm convinced you're not there.
So define this network gap and share some of the data, because we got lots of data-driven marketers here. What's the data say?
Yeah, so it's been a little bit, but PRRI did some research about the networks that we have in America. And what it tells us is that if you're white, more than 90% of your network is white like you. If you're Black, more than 80% of your network is Black like you. And if you're Latino, your network is more than 60% comprised of people who are Latino. The trick here, note to thyself, is that to be Latino actually isn't to be a race, it's to be an ethnicity. So in our culture, we come in all races, creeds, and beliefs. So to be Hispanic does not necessarily default to your Blackness or your whiteness, although in the United States, more than 70% of Latinos self-identify as white. So, the power of that is if you are not intentional about who you're getting to know and who you're involving in your network, it is highly likely that you're going to grow up. You'll be successful, but you'll only know people like yourself. And that creates a deficit. It's a deficit of imagination. It's a deficit of reach. It certainly is a deficit in the role that you can play as an inclusive leader, truly building teams where the alchemy of differences shows up in the product. And we know the research, whether you're looking at McKinsey or Deloitte, any number of companies, that tells us companies that have diversity of leadership, not just in gender, but in race and ethnicity, are more profitable, and not by a little bit. It could be upwards of 30%. So there's much to be done if you consider yourself a leader and you look and think about how you're connected and who you're connected to, and you don't see the diversity in your network. It begins with you.
Yeah, so it begins with you. One of the questions that we're getting from the audience is, I think a lot of people recognize that, and there's positive intent. They want to do the right thing. But it's also a real scary time where people don't want to step on a landmine, say the wrong thing. And then on the flip side, what are the tools? I mean, obviously LinkedIn is probably this, the most incredible platform when you think about professional development. But what are some of the tools, procedures, techniques to kind of really tap into, people's lived experiences? Because we see brands kind of stumble all the time for some reason.
Yeah.
So what would be some of your advice?
They do. So, I could tell you, it's not unusual where, an individual manager or person, particularly in this era of Black Lives Matter, comes up and says, where do I start? Clue, my 9-year-old son would say, Google it. I mean, literally, there is no shortage of information available. There's no shortage of content available. So if you're thinking about where do you get your content? Where do you get your news feed? Who are you listening to in podcasts? How are you ensuring the diversity of voices and perspectives there? One of the things you have to do to get it right is do something. And doing something usually means you'll get it wrong some of the time. Cultural humility is really a powerful antidote for when you get it wrong. Cultural humility is a way of saying, I recognize that I come from a set of experiences that may not be the same of yours, so I'm going to be interested in getting to know you. But as leaders or managers, what we often do is we go to the first person we see at work and we ask them, could you help me understand this? Cautionary note there, don't give your employees more work to do. And what I mean by that is don't expect them to have to educate you on something you should have the ability to educate yourselves. Got a great learning path we unlocked on LinkedIn Learning on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. It's free, so if you're not a premium member, go to it, check it out. It'll walk you through the things that you need to know to be a human being in today's world and be effective in beginning to unlock the talent and potential of others. As deliverers of messaging, as marketers, I really understand our desire to kind of box people up and address a mass market, but that mass market no longer exists. In a world and era of customization where I can go to my Nike app and get what I want, marketers need to up the game and be able to recognize the differences in communities and be able to speak in the voice of the community. In the same way that if I walk into an environment and I only speak Spanish, I need to know that there's someone who can communicate with me in Spanish when I walk into that bank or when I walk into that supermarket. And all too frequently, we've defaulted to a world that existed in 1950, but it no longer exists in 2020.
That's right. And so, you mentioned Pride, like it's Pride Month right now. Like there's obviously so much going on with Black Lives Matter. Is there any advice that you would give to brands kind of to participate in these moments? Because it's really interesting on the one hand, Pride is now like the cool thing to do. Like everyone does Pride, right? But, certainly I would even say 10 years ago, that was not the case. And just now you see brands and leaders, certainly folks like Jeff Weiner, your former CEO, really taking these powerful stands. Mark Benioff, of course, Anda and Rachel, at Notch and Micmac. You see these powerful business leaders now taking a stand on Black Lives Matter. And that would have been unheard of just a year ago. Yeah. And so what kind of advice do you have for business leaders that are trying to participate in this dialogue?
Yeah, I think the conversation that we're hearing is this can't be a moment. It's got to be a movement. I mean, certainly this isn't something that's being created by governments. This is something being created by human beings. And as you take a stand, beware going out with, great advertising or great messaging and then walking back from that message or not having a conversation about it for the next year. I personally enjoy getting onto Netflix and being able to find content that, not only serves the Black community and represents the voice and the experiences and is directed and produced and created by the Black community, but I don't have to wait till the month of February to get access to that. And I think it's
there's more than just Black History Month.
Could you imagine that? So if we could treat the metaphor of a month that we dedicate to history and begin to recognize those lives are happening all day long, all year long, we as leaders need to speak to that continually. And with that, we need to recognize that that's where the trust gets built. Trust is consistency over time. And so if we're going to be inconsistent around our messaging and around our thinking, we're not going to build trust with these communities. And we certainly won't build trust with our own employees, who are the biggest ambassadors for the work that we do and the products we represent.
So you bring up, our employees, those are certainly our first line of defense. Those are our employee resource groups, our ERGs. What kind of advice would you actually have to anyone listening? So if you are not of color, how can you start to get involved in this conversation, and how can you actually be a part of the movement?
Yeah, it's a simple acronym, LLE, listen, learn, and engage. If you're in an organization that has employee resource groups, be a part of the group. You don't have to be a member of the group to participate. Bidirectional mentoring can be a really powerful experience. If you're a senior leader to take on a more junior person, you not only have the opportunity to get to know them and help them unlock their potential, but they can help you unlock your magic powers too. by getting familiar with the challenges and the opportunity, the experiences, the expectations that exist from people who come from different backgrounds and different communities. You know, as leaders, really important to consider, in 1970, no one expected you to be able to lead diverse teams. In 2020, if you don't have that skill set, you're missing the market, because the game is on now. And so it's important that we stake this out as a part of our own development, not because it's nice to do, not because we're going to get into trouble if we don't do it, but in reality, there is no way to level up in the work that we do without having this as a capability, because you will miss the market on the best talent and you will miss the market on consumer trust if you're not able to speak to members from these communities.
Absolutely. And especially when you think of where we are with millennials being almost 40+% diverse, Gen Z being even more diverse. And when you think about kids, you know, over 50% of all kids today are diverse. So, you know, this is actually a business imperative. I feel like we have just time for one more question because we're almost at time. Can you share some of the names of the companies that you believe are truly exhibiting this humility that you mentioned regarding the candidate experience or within the workplace?
You know, there are a number of companies that are doing interesting things. I think we all leave a lot to be desired around demonstrating the cultural humility. I look at a company like Nike. They caught my attention. They've had challenges, but one of the things that they're demonstrating is consistency and leaning into the message. I'm proud of our company, certainly LinkedIn and the Microsoft family, being able to step up and recognize it's not that you get it right 100% of the time. It's that when you're not getting it right, you're willing to redirect, and you've got to have a stake in the matter. Certainly, we've seen a lot of companies that have been vested in this, but it's not going to be just about how we self-promote. It's going to be how we learn from each other and how we recognize that no one has cornered the market here, and we all have a lot to learn together and lead together every day.
Rosanna, I can't think of any other parting words than that. You are such a powerful leader. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for really being a champion for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. A special shout out to Notch and Micmac again, Anda and Rachel. Thank you for bringing us all together. And please go on to LinkedIn, follow Rosanna, and have a great rest of Pros and Content Connect 2020. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great one, everyone.